I'm Christian Catalini. I'm one of the co-founders and run strategy here at Lightspark. But today, I want to talk about an idea. It's an observation about people, technology, and history. Open always eventually wins. Not sometimes, always. It's simply a law of progress. Every network that matters today began its journey from closed to open. It's the story of the internet itself. But there's one final frontier, one last great closed network, the operating system for human ambition, money. In the near future, money will live on an open network. Why open? Because open compounds builders. Open accelerates progress. Open crashes cost. The temptation right now is to build shiny new castles, corp chains with higher walls. We're here to build roads, rails any one of you can use. Not our network, your network. This is more than a mission, it's a conviction at Lightspark. And today, I want to show you why it's the most important work we've ever done. Where does this pattern begin? Right here. 2,000 years ago, with a diplomat named Zhang Shen, sent west into the unknown by its emperor. His journey sparked what we now call the Silk Road. But here's the thing that most people get wrong about it. It was not one road. It was one network, an open system. And because it was open, no one owned it. No emperor could shut it down. Who built it? Not kings. People like the ones in this audience, entrepreneurs and innovators taking incredible risk, fueled by their own ambition. Kings tried to tax it, robbers tried to raid it, emperors tried to wall it off. But the network was smarter than the sum of its parts. It just routed around them. It was alive. And here's the key part, the most important element of that. It was not just a road. It was connecting and moving more than just silk. It moved ideas, it moved progress, it moved and connected separate words. Fast forward 100 years, a new empire is on the rise, Rome. And they face a similar challenge, but on an entirely different scale. How do you not just trade between different regions and bring them together? How do you unify them into a coherent empire? The Romans inherited a world of chaos, a world of friction, a nightmare of incompatible parts. And then they had a profound modern insight. You cannot build an empire on chaos. You first need to build an operating system for it. So they created a protocol, a standard, one design for every road, one width, one foundation, one coin, all the way from rainy Britain, or Los Angeles today, to the deserts of Africa. The effects were staggering. The cost of transport crushed, collapsed by a factor of 10. And trade didn't just grow between the regions, it exploded. For the first time, an entire continent came together as a single connected economy. They built the platform and the empire clicked into place. The proof, 2 millennia later, you can still trace those ancient Roman roads with the lights of Europe at night. Which leads to a very important question. If the recipe for progress has been known for 2,000 years, why have we failed to apply it to the most important network of them all? This, fragmentation, this is the enemy. Now, some people will look at it and just call it inefficiency. That word is not nearly big enough. Fragmentation is the tax that the present levies on our future. It's the collective price we all pay for the lack of imagination, the lack of courage. It's friction that invisibly, quietly grinds progress to a halt. And why does it happen? It happens when everyone is focused on building their little kingdom. The result of chasing the next quarter rather than building for the next decade. It builds a world of incompatible parts where nothing quite connects. And if you look closely, it's everywhere. This is what fragmentation used to look like, a few hundred years ago in the real world. For 100 years, this is how we did global trade. It was called break bulk cargo, and it was a total nightmare. Every box, every sack, every barrel, loaded by hand, one by one. It was painfully slow, widely expensive, a world built entirely on friction. Get this, most ships would spend most time at port than at sea. And change, as usual, didn't come from the shipping companies of the time. it came from a total outsider, the Satoshi of his time, a trucker from North Carolina named Malcolm McLean. He was not a shipping magnate. It was just a guy that got sick and tired of waiting. He saw that everyone was just focused on building, better ships or better cranes, better tooling. The problem was the gap in between, the interface. He had an idea so simple that it was revolutionary. He created the shipping container, a simple standard steel box. The genius wasn't the box itself. It was the standard. Now suddenly one design could work on a truck, on a train, on a ship. Same model all across the world. One container, every port. The world suddenly had an open standard to use. What happened? Well, let's look at the numbers. The cost of loading 1 ton of cargo went from $5.86 to 16 cents. That's a 97% reduction. The friction, poof, just evaporated overnight. The time it took to unload a ship went from days to hours. And global trade, it didn't just grow, it exploded over 700% in the span of 20 years. It shaped the world we all enjoy and we all live in today. And you don't have to trust me. As The Economist put it, a boring box of steel did more for globalization and global trade than 50 years of trade agreements combined. That is the power of a simple, open standard. This problem wasn't unique to ships. The same exact story of fragmentation played out on land. This is England in 1840, peak industrial revolution. But if you look at that, it doesn't look like progress, right? It looks like total chaos. 2 different railway companies built lines into the same station, and their tracks differed by a few inches. And because of those few inches, everything ground to a halt. Every passenger had to hold their luggage, move across the platform, load on a new train. Every piece of cargo unloaded and reloaded by hand. It was a world where the plugs just didn't match. Total, predictable, maddening friction. Now, it's easy to look at this and have a good laugh, right? It's like, how could they be so foolish? Of course, railroads should all run on the same standard, right? It seems obvious. But this is the perfect picture of the future of money if we get it wrong. We're about to repeat the same mistakes. And this wasn't just a British problem, right? America had it even worse. Now imagine a continent-sized nation with more than 20 railroad standards. It was a patchwork, totally divided economy, not really a network that could function well. Every junction turned out in a dead end, freight off, freight on. The cost was staggering. During the Civil War, the Union was spending the modern equivalent of $30 million a month just to move supplies from one train to the other. Now, for decades, everyone was fully aware of the problem, like with money today. Nobody wanted to pay the price to fix it. And then in 1886, they ended up doing something that, when I read it the first time, it sounded completely impossible. Over the span of a single weekend, an army of workers converted 13,000 miles of tracks to a national standard. America was finally connected in just 36 hours. Monday morning, the trains rolled through. The system was finally won. The results were immediate. Trade jumped by 20%. The American economy clicked into place. They chose 2 days of incredible pain and hard work for a century of frictionless progress. Now, this isn't just a story about the past. After 200 years, we still cannot agree on how far to put apart those 2 pieces of steel. Sending a container from Europe to Asia requires you changing train again and again and again, 4 times to go from Portugal to China. Why? Because agreeing on a global standard is hard, it's political. It comes down to a very simple paradox. Everybody loves open standards as long as it's their standard. And this pattern is repeating itself right now in many more important places than railroads. We see it in fights about AI regulation. We see it in global trade. And we see it in money. We see it when innovative countries that have solved real-time domestic payments, like India and Brazil, take the technology and try to export it to their neighbors. The world just isn't ready to listen. This is the challenge we face. We live in an increasingly multipolar world. The age of top-down standards dropped down by an empire or a single tech company is over. That model is fundamentally broken. Now, if the next great network cannot come from a single country, or from a single company, where is it going to come from? Well, the answer is it has to be something fundamentally new. It has to be neutral. It has to be permissionless. It has to be truly open. Now, I can imagine what some of you might be thinking. Okay, a neutral network for money. That's radical, maybe a tad naive. But ironically, it's the very solution that our industry pioneered more than half a century ago when we faced our own crisis of fragmentation. In the 1960s, the financial industry was struggling to scale something that looked both really promising, but also complex. Every bank had its own new payment card. Every card was its own silo. Bank of America, tried to brute force the problem, build their own empire. Essentially, we would call it their own corp chain today. It failed spectacularly. Their losses were staggering. Delinquency rates hit 22% in the first year. They burned through hundreds of millions of today's dollars in a single year. But they learned a very powerful lesson. Even if you're the largest bank in the world, you cannot impose a standard top-down on the market. It just doesn't work that way. That's when D-Hawk saw the future. Stop trying to own the network. Invite your competitors to it. Pretty radical thought. Cooperate on the platform, compete on the products. It worked brilliantly. The growth of the network was simply staggering. But of course, and I'll cut it short, the story doesn't end here. That's why we're all here today, right? History has a pattern. The open network of one generation, or openish, turns out into the closed of the next. Which is why every one of your companies today has to make the same choice the banks did in 1976. Which brings us to the only question that truly matters. I've talked a lot about history, about ecosystems, about changing the world. But let's be honest, none of us gets paid to change the world. We get paid to ship amazing products, to scale experiences, to deliver value, manage a P&L, and win. So let's get right into it. What's in it for you, for your company? It's simple. More margin, faster speed to market, and massive scale. Open networks pull demand towards you. They don't erase winners. This is a very common misconception. People are afraid of open systems because they're worried they're not going to be able to win. Maersk and IKEA didn't need to own the container to win. They own execution on top of it. But let me show you more of that playbook. This was retail before 1974. Every store, its own little island. Checkout was slow, inventory was guesswork. There was no universal language. And then came this. The universal money address. The universal product code. One code, every product. Retail became software. At first, it almost failed. It was the classic chicken and egg problem. The retailers wouldn't buy, the fancy machines from IBM until their products had the code. And of course, the manufacturers wouldn't stick the codes until the retailers had the machines. And then, through hard work, it hit a tipping point. Suddenly, the entire system clicked into place. And a new rhythm for commerce was suddenly born. Scan, ship, scale. Scan, ship, scale. And those boring little lines, the same she's wearing on the sweater, well, they ended up saving the grocery industry $17 billion each year. Now, $17 billion, that's a really big number for the time. But here's the secret. From your perspective, that's the least interesting part of the story. The real story is what happened to the companies that saw the future first, embraced it, and brought it on. Their productivity shot up. They hired more people. They ended up growing at a staggering 20% on revenues, outpacing all of their rivals. Why? Because they didn't just get more efficient, they got faster, smarter, more innovative. They suddenly saw it all. What to build, where to sell it, what should be coming next. And when you get that kind of clarity, you don't just go bigger, you go global. You build a supply chain at a scale and efficiency that the world had never seen. The early computer industry, same story. A world of proprietary systems. Every machine, its own little universe, from DEC to HP to the IBM mainframes. Software painfully written by amazing engineers at the time would work on one machine and no other. Then, in 1981, IBM, the king of closed systems, made a fateful decision. They were rushing, okay? They were behind. They felt like they had to catch up. And they tried to assemble their new personal computer with parts from others. They even ended up licensing its beating heart from a little software manufacturer from New Mexico, Microsoft. Bill Gates' masterful decision was to retain the license to give MS-DOS away to everyone else beyond IBM. IBM didn't think that software would be that important. After all, they own the hardware, right? So what's the risk? It's a natural experiment in what happens when you pit a closed system against an open one. And the results were not even close, okay? Apple meticulously controlled every piece of hardware and software. They likely had the better product. Meanwhile, Wintel exploded. Dozens of hardware companies, the market was racing and competing to build faster features, better devices, lower cost. You could finally, as an engineer, write your code once and run it everywhere. The OpenPC platform enabled a pace of innovation that the closed systems just couldn't match. Within less than a decade, again, less than 10 years, they had 80% market share. It is one of the most decisive victories in tech history. And the lesson is brutal and absolute. Markets don't choose the best products. Markets choose the biggest, most vibrant ecosystem, always. Same happened in telecommunications. In the 90s, telcos were a mesh of different national systems. Progress was slow, devices were expensive. Then Europe somehow managed to pull a universal standard, GSM. The results were immediate and dramatic. Handset costs were slashed in half. Millions of subscribers turned into billions. At the time, Europe represented 75% of global cellular. Now, some incumbents fought it, and they got wiped out. Motorola's market share went from 45% to 25% in a couple of years. The ones that embraced it built the future. Then came the internet, classic example, right? But like the corp chains today, at the beginning, the temptation is always to go for control, to curate your own experience. American Online, Apple eWord, Microsoft Network. On the other side, there was a simple open protocol. It wasn't even a product. It wasn't a fair fight. It was complete annihilation. $2.1 trillion of value created in the United States alone. 21% GDP growth over 5 years in developed economies. Why? Because you cannot curate the future. Permissionless innovation will always create exponentially more value than a closed alternative. Period. That's it. Now, after all this history, you'd think the strategic lesson is kind of obvious, right? But what happens when you start as a closed company and open up, maybe by embracing public APIs? This chart shows you, so follow the continuous line, the continuous blue line. It tracks the company market value the moment, and that's the changing color, you embrace open APIs. It's a completely different growth trajectory. Revenues go up 39% more. Why? Because you stop being the bottleneck. You stop trying to do everything yourself. You invert the firm and you unleash developers and partners and others to build value with you. Open standards don't just make things more efficient. Again, it's not just about efficiency. They inevitably become the foundation for whatever comes next. This is India with UPI, right? So transactions didn't just grow, they went vertical. 18 billion transactions a month. That's 85% of all digital payments in India. But here's the catch. That's 50% of all global real-time transactions in one single country, one single system. It's massive. But there's more. Once payments became a solved problem in India, something that the country had been struggling for a while, credit, and you heard about it this morning, boomed right on top of it. Why? Because the network became the platform, and it was much easier to build more on top of it. I want to close by focusing on the most unexpected wins, the ones that break all the rules. Now, when Linux appeared, maybe because of the cute penguin mascot, people called it a toy. It's not as polished as Windows, not enterprise grade. It's a hobbyist project. And today, we hear the same concerns about the Bitcoin network. It's not as fast as our high-throughput, payment-optimized corp chain. It's not Turing complete. They're missing the point, just like Linux detractors did back then. The power is not the features you get in version 1, 2, or 3. The power is the new open architecture. That toy with a penguin mascot today powers 90% of the cloud, 100% of the world top 500 supercomputers, and delivered $8.8 trillion in value. It became so dominant that the company that once called it a cancer to be eradicated, well, ended up embracing it. The open standard was too powerful even for Microsoft to battle with. But I want to show you one last thing. You see this? This is a satellite, part of a system called GPS. This was not built for you nor me. It was built by the US government for the US government. A closed box, a top secret tool, designed for two core things: strategic advantage and control. And then, in 1980s, something amazing happened. They flipped the switch and they give the signal away to everyone for free. They handed humanity a superpower, a new launchpad, and they had no idea what they were, about to unleash. So what happened? This happened. Suddenly, a logistic company knows where your package is every second. A couple of people can put together a map of the planet, put it in your pocket, and you're never lost again. It's magic. An injured hiker can be rescued from a mountain. Farmers can grow more food. I use it with my kids, to catch little monsters in the neighborhood. And here's the beautiful thing, the truly beautiful thing. Nobody had to launch a satellite. Nobody had to ask for permission. The foundation was just there for everyone to build on. So you've seen this pattern again and again and again. So after 2,000 years of history, we come to a decision. Some people see the future of money, and they want to own it. Walls, higher walls, platforms, closed platforms. A cage painted gold with partnership and onboarding incentives. They want to own the operating system of your money. And I have some bad news. In their system, you don't get root access. So they'll come to you, with a great story, a very polished story about a corp chain. Purpose-built for payments, high throughput. They'll say all sort of wonderful things that we're missing. You need our technology. You need our permission. You need our stablecoin. But remember, their rails, their rules. Eventually, that's going to be true. And of course, they'll have to dismiss Bitcoin, right? So something cypherpunks mined in their basement. A toy, a relic, never meant to scale. Too volatile, not money. Digital gold, okay, maybe. They'll have to admit to that. They'll look you straight in the eyes and tell you, there is no such thing as magic, internet money. They will tell you all of this with a straight face. They need you to believe it. They want you to believe it. And yet, while they're talking in the background, something else is happening. The smartest money in the world, institutions, sovereign wealth funds, largest asset managers, nations, they're not listening to their story. They're quietly accumulating. And again, this is not just about the digital gold part. It's about the network. Why? Why the disconnect? Because the vision they're trying to sell you has no room for architects. It has only room for tenants. We at Lightspark believe that the architect should be you. And look, this was never about technology alone. This is about your freedom to build. Your freedom to build without asking for permission. The future of money is not closed. The future of money is open. It's a very simple choice. Do we build higher walls or open roads? A grid that connects every one of you. A grid that belongs to no one. A grid that can truly fuel human ingenuity. History only remembers one of those choices. It remembers the road builders. Thank you.